I have Jeff Downs with me here today. He's an author and math teacher at Madison Junior High School. Jeff, thanks for coming in today.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me on.
Oh, of course. It's great to have you back.
Thank you.
You were back here in July?
Yes.
Awesome. Yes. Sweet. Well, it's good to have you in for a second time then.
Thank you.
So, Jeff, tell us just a little bit, real quick before we get in, because you had a new book released over the summer.
Yes.
Tell us, before we get into that, let's talk a little bit just about your background as an author.
Oh, okay. So it's been an interesting journey. So I think, gosh, this is going way back. When I was a young father, just starting out in life, when I came here in July, I mentioned that my son had been diagnosed with cancer. And for me, as a young father, I was trying to look for an outlet to kind of express myself and get those feelings out. And so that's how the whole writing journey started. It was just trying to get my thoughts out. And it was fun. I had 4 novels published, and they were pretty much in a row. Boom, 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 boom. And then there came a time when my kids were growing older, and I decided that they were reaching scout age and looking towards mission age, and I had to make a decision. Okay, well, am I going to make writing my whole focus, or am I going to steer my time and efforts to my kids? And so that was really no contest for me. So I decided to put it aside for a bit, and I had one last novel that was done. The publisher wanted it, and I had to tell him no. I had to take a pass on it. And I put that by the side of the bed and just focused on my kids. And I've never regretted that, but when my youngest son left home, he encouraged me to finish it. And so I resubmitted it, and they wanted it. And so I entered the process of making sure it was up to date and ready to go. And then all of a sudden there were giant cuts in the publishing world. Covenant Communications was absorbed by Deseret Book. And I don't know if you noticed, but all the Siegel bookstores closed. And so that was a huge, there was a big downturn. And I get it. The attention economy has shifted. I heard a stat on the radio that 70% of people are consuming content on their phones now. And because of that, producers of media content are now purchasing 20% of what they once were buying and making it available for 80% less people. So I totally get it. So when I was here last time, I mentioned that they decided to make some cuts. They sent me a check. They canceled my contract. And that was painful. That really did hurt. And I wondered, well, why? Why? And I couldn't understand it. And so I said to my older boys, I said, let's go. Can you help me with the finished edits? Because I really want to get this out. After all these years, I mean, this is 20 years in the making, this particular novel that we're talking about today.
Wow.
And little did I know that my family would be facing a major health crisis in these last several months. And many of the themes my younger self was writing about all those years ago, my family needed to be reminded of today. So thankfully, we were able to finish that. And looking back, there is no way that I could have finished that project and remained on my publisher's timeline if I was still locked into that. There's no way. And so them cutting me was actually a great blessing. And so we're producing this ourselves. And so, and note the beauty of all this. I wrote it for my children, put it aside for the benefit of my children, and now my children and I are finishing creating it together. And you can't tell me God's not in the details there. So that's what's made this a great deal of fun. So yes, I've had the experience of publishing in the past, and then I'm revisiting it one more time, and this time involving all my kids.
Oh, thank you for that, Jeff. Thanks for just sharing that journey with us, because it is really cool to see how everything has worked out just in getting this book out. Because, again, I noticed, too, when I was looking at your publishings that there was an 18-year gap between your publishings. And I was like, why? Oh, what was it? But now I know. Yeah, exactly. Now we know. So with this new book, it is your newest release out in July. It's called Shaken. So tell us just a little bit about it, kind of like, what, I guess, maybe a little bit of what inspired it and what the book's about.
Well, I grew up in Southern California where earthquakes are a regular part of life. And I thought to myself, what if the big earthquake geologists have always been warning us about, those of us that lived in California, Oregon, and Washington were always told about the big quake that's coming. What if it suddenly struck? And that led me to a path of intense research so I could try and develop what would that feel like? What would that look like? And that's the kind of dystopian world that I'm dropping you into in this volume. And so it's been interesting because ever since I wrote this book, 20 years back was the first draft. 20 years back, I've seen these mini quakes that have been happening all around that area. In fact, we just had one a week and a half ago in California. Oh. And that kind of, not a big surprise because I knew the research and I knew the science behind it. So I get that. But I just thought it would be interesting to pursue that. So in my book, Connor McCoy, he's a man in his mid-20s. He has a tense relationship with his widowed father, and they get in this heated argument. And, well, Connor storms off, and he's driving home, and this massive earthquake hits. And that's when Connor's world literally begins falling apart. And now he's determined to get back to his father's remote cabin, but his journey keeps pulling him into one dangerous rescue after another. And just as he's reaching his breaking point, he meets Maddie, an evangelical Christian, and her faith forces him to confront his own beliefs. Now Connor's racing against time to get back to his father, but every rescue raises the stakes. And he fears the choices that he's making could end up costing him everything. And so all this takes place in a 24-hour period, so the book really cooks. But it just kind of takes you on that journey. I'm a big fan of science fiction and action-adventure novels, but it's a real challenge to find books that aren't filled with a lot of language and gratuitous stuff. You know what I mean? Mm. And there are several mainstream authors that I found, but the clean ones are really few in number. And so I often turn to Christian authors that I know won't let me down, but sometimes we bump up against the theology. Mm-hmm. And so I write novels for an LDS audience. All the action and adventure is there, but I also try to weave in gospel-related themes in subtle ways to try and lift and inspire. And it's funny because over the years, some people have encouraged me to rip out some of those gospel themes so I could sell more or reach a broader audience, but that's not my target audience. My target audience has always been my kids and my grandchildren. Wow. I want to unapologetically share my testimony through my writing. So I don't back away from the gospel themes. I lean into them. And I think that's more important now more than ever.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it is really cool just to see that you're sticking to that consistent audience. Because it's big, with the pressures of just the world and, success and reaching a broader audience, you can do these things and you can be more successful, but it's really cool to see that you've still stuck to that with the publishings that you've done.
Well, it's always been about them. It always has been.
Thank you for that. So, when you were, writing this book, because, you've written a few, right? You've published a few.
This is number 6.
Yeah, number 6 total. Okay, awesome. So, when you were writing this one, do you have maybe some unexpected challenges that came up during that process? And then maybe, something like a hardest part, a favorite part, that kind of thing?
Well, as I mentioned, the themes, I think that's the funnest part about writing these is trying to incorporate what is the theme that I can share with my kid? Because if my kids want to get to know me, all they got to do is read the books because my personality is all throughout them. And one of my sons, as we were editing this last book, he talked about that. He said, I can see your personality all throughout. And that was the goal. That was, to try and share my personality and my testimony in a way that's not going to be boring and stale and preachy, but do it in a way that's kind of entertaining. And so this volume, I think it was just pursuing those themes. Joseph Smith taught that to return to the presence of God, we have to have a character similar to God's character. So everything this church teaches is designed to help us develop that type of character. And so Connor in this book is literally on a highway trying to get back to his father. You see the metaphor?
That is cool.
Okay. So Isaiah, he describes he describes what's called the highway of holiness. And in my mind, as I was writing this, I thought it beautifully described the plan of salvation or the covenant path. And we're all on this highway together, and we should all be ministering to each other. And if we do that, then our characters developed, and everyone around us, their characters developed. And so that's really what it's all about. And so that's what this story is metaphorically trying to do, is to show you a person on this path, all the obstacles they have to face, and see that, in fact, it's for their benefit. And other topics I hit in here are prayer, the concept of truth, what does saved really mean, and I even touch on priesthood blessings. So that's been the funnest part. And you know, I have some friends out there that they really look down on fiction. And it's interesting, especially in the religious community. Oh, fiction's a waste of time. And but there's research showing that it actually activates many of the same brain networks used in real life experience. In fact, they got MRI studies that show that when we follow fictional characters and their challenges, the brain treats the story like a cognitive simulation. So we're actually rehearsing the same social and mental processes we use in real life. So if you think about it, fiction can actually strengthen skills we would later draw on for relationships and decisions. I like what one Canadian psychologist said. He said, fiction is the flight simulator for the mind. And that's a cool thing to think about, but it's also scary because whatever you're putting in, that's what you're going to get in. Garbage in, garbage out. So you got to watch out. And that's why I think it's so important to try and look for that clean fiction. And you know, in my mind, that big time gap that we were talking about, you know, I read and read and read. I read dozens and dozens of books throughout the year. And there was a point a couple of years back where I thought, you know, I'm tired of being a consumer. It's time to be a producer. And so that's what the last two books have been about, is just producing to try and contribute in some way and not just be, a full-time consumer. Because it's fun to create. It's fun to weave and build those stories, and there's that joy, like a painting, like a poem, is something you can put your fingerprints into and then hopefully leave something behind that someone would benefit from.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us, Jeff. So if you are, maybe making an invitation to people about this book, right? Why would you say that people need to pick up this book and read it?
Well, no one is immune from trial and heartache in this life. All of us will be shaken up at one point or another. But shaken doesn't have to mean defeated. We need to remember that Heavenly Father sees the big picture, and if we're willing to be instruments in His hands, He's more than capable of putting together all the broken pieces for the benefit of everyone involved. And, each of us are in the driver's seat in this life, but it's God who's holding the map. And so if you're looking for something that's exciting, a romantic adventure that lifts your spirit and strengthens your testimony, that's what Shaken's all about. It's just to remind us of that. Like it says on the title, it's a novel of faith rising from ruin. That's the whole idea, is we can rise from it no matter what the world throws at us. If we look for the helpers, for the good that's out there, that is going to encourage us to keep going. And I think we need that now more than ever. We need to be encouraged to keep going because things are crumbling. Things are crumbling. We're told they're going to get worse, but that's okay because that's what it's all about. And we will be strengthened because of it.
Thank you for sharing that. And Jeff, if you had to just give one piece of advice to maybe aspiring authors or anybody like that, or maybe just, people going through a hard trial, whichever one you would want to pick, what would that advice be?
Well, when I've been asked in the past, what would I tell an author? I would just say stick to your heart. It's not about the money. It's not about the fame. All of that is fleeting. I've had the fortune of being able to be in some pretty big conventions with publishing houses and what have you, and it's been fun, but it's fleeting. It vanishes. But if you're writing with your heart, if you're truly trying to put together something that's meaningful, God will use that in incredible ways. And oftentimes it's just the building up of your own strength. And that's something I've learned throughout this journey of writing this. My family has been going through a lot lately. And the messages and themes that I wrote in that first draft 20 years ago, I am having to now live now. And it's interesting because that younger version of myself is saying, hey, you can do this. And this older, more cynical, jaded version of myself is going, yeah, you're right, Jeff. And I need to be reminded of that. And so I'm grateful my son had me finish this, because it couldn't have come at a better time. And hopefully there are others out there that would benefit from what's in here, because I'm telling you, it's benefited me greatly. And hopefully others can draw strength from it as well.
Thank you for that, Jeff. And remind us where we can find your book.
So the easiest place is Amazon, Amazon.com. If you go to Shaken by Jeff Downs, just click on my name when that comes up, and all my titles will be there in my author's page. And, for ebook copies, your Kindle copies, pretty darn cheap. If you're looking for printed paper copies, they're there as well. But, again, look around, because there's several different titles, and each of them are designed to try and encourage, motivate, and inspire. That was always my goal. So take a look. All different kinds of genres. That's what's been fun, writing in all different formats. And so take a look. There's something there to inspire.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Jeff. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.